Perfect. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's webinar, Beyond the Screen, Protecting Children from Exploitation and Abuse in Online and Offline Spaces. This session is part of a series of events we have organized to celebrate the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And today's discussion in particular explores a critical area of research, and we are delighted to have 4 panelists today representing from very different sectors who work in ending and preventing child sexual exploitation and abuse. Our group, the Gender Violence Research and Collaboration Network, is a global community of over 400 members from more than 60 countries. Through regular meetings, discussions, and collaborative projects, we aim to support early and mid-career researchers and practitioners by leveraging the expertise of senior colleagues, exchanging insights, and promoting innovative research to contribute to effective solutions in the field of GVV worldwide. If you're interested in joining the network and accessing our newsletters and events leaks, please do click on the link, which will be in the chat shortly. We would also like to share a massive thank you to our partners for this event, the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, SVRI, and Childlight. And today I'm delighted because I'm co-chairing this session with Kelvin Lay from Childlight, who will spend the next few minutes explaining what the organization does. Kelvin, over to you.
Thanks, Sabrina. Greatly appreciated. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. So thank you to all the panelists. My role at Childlight is the director of the technical advisory programme. So Childlight is within the University of Edinburgh, as hopefully everybody here knows. We're set up to look at the prevalence and nature of child exploitation across the globe, both online and offline. So we've spent the last 2 years gathering data from all sorts of areas, particularly from my side, looking at the big data holders, the likes of NECMEC, Child Rescue Coalition, Internet Watch Foundation, and the Child CC3 from Canada. So having gathered that data, we're looking to pull together the index, and that's for the researchers and the cleverer guys within the university to do. So my role is more on the operational side, dealing with the data, so following that data and working with countries to deliver a response to that data. So what Childlight don't want to do is be the holder of the data. Could somebody put the mute on? I think we're getting a bit of feedback. I don't know if everyone's getting that. So we're following that data. So we're going into countries. For example, we've just been to Pakistan to work with the Pakistani authorities. Pakistan are receiving 2 million referrals from NECMEC each year. Unfortunately, the infrastructure within Pakistan is not set up to deal with that. So we're working with the Pakistani authorities, with our partners, with Interpol, to create a response to that. Likewise, we've just come back from Ghana. Some of my team have just been in Ghana doing exactly that. So our goal is to visit and know what's going on in all of the 196 countries with our partners to deliver a response and not cause more of a problem, essentially. So on that note, I'll hand back over to Sabrina.
Thank you so much again, Kelvin, for being here. And like I said, we're delighted to be partnering with Childlight on this event in particular, and hopefully many more to come as well. And as you can see, or before on the screen, we had the pictures and bios of our panelists, but I would also like to take another opportunity to introduce them before getting started. I feel immensely grateful and lucky that each of them have, given their time to us today to discuss this topic. And yeah, without further ado, let's get started with the introductions. So first we have Mwani Motisia. Mwani heads the Anti-Human Trafficking and Child Protection Unit in Kenya's Directorate of Criminal Investigation, leading a specialized and dedicated team to address child sexual abuse, support victims, and train officers and anti-trafficking initiatives. Next, we have Dr. Bernadette Madrid. Bernadette is the Executive Director of the Child Protection Network Foundation, leading child protection training and development in the Philippines, while also heading the Child Protection Unit at the University of the Philippines, Manila, Philippine General Hospital, and serving as Associate Clinical Professor of Pediatrics and founding chair of the Child Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation Study Group at the National Institutes of Health of the Philippines. Our third panelist is Nathalie Meuns. Nathalie leads the EU advocacy effort for Telehomes Netherlands on the issue of online child sexual exploitation, advocating for policy solutions and leading multi-country research on how to better protect children from online child sexual harm. And our fourth panelist is Sydney, Fellow. Sydney is a professor at the Department of Psychology, Universidad Tueti do Pirana. I'm definitely butchered that name, with a primary research focus on child abuse, intimate partner violence, and services for the protection of women and children. Currently, he serves as the principal investigator for the Manitoba Council for International Cooperation, conducting research on the adaptation of the NICHD protocol to Mozambican Portuguese, Changana, and Mozambican Sign Language. Today's event will be in a panel format, and we'll ask participants specific questions, and if any of the other panelists want to jump in, please do. We will have time at the end for a Q&A session. However, please feel free to also pop questions in the chat box as well throughout the session. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started if all the panelists are ready. I know we see, okay, I can see Bernie, Sydney, Natalie, and Wendy. Perfect, okay. So, I think let's go ahead and first get started with how, and this question in particular, I think first, I want to go to Sydney first, but feel free for the other panelists to join in. But how do cases of online child sexual exploitation and abuse often connect with offline abuse? And why is it important to address these forms together? I think this is an important question to start out this webinar with, because we're not focusing on just the online aspect here, we're looking at both and how they can intersect. So Sydney, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, the name is Tuyuchi. It's like a tiny bird. You're never going to say this name again in your life, so don't worry, don't sweat over. Sabrina is like, you're not going to say this word ever again. So right now in Latin America, our major concern is that we created the hotlines, we created the reporting channels, but we're still lacking knowledge regarding disclosure. And then the online world invaded child sexual abuse. And then we were not doing a great job in the offline world, and now we have to deal with the online world already. So mainly what we're trying to figure out is how and to whom people disclose sexual abuse online and offline. Those are the two main issues for public policy and practitioners at the moment. Because many times what we have here is that people are not aware of the hotlines, of the reporting channels. So even if it is a classic case of child sexual abuse, they still are figuring out how to work with that. And there's a lot of confusion. We're doing some work about that in Latin America about what actually is sexual abuse online. So that's very confusing for children, especially when they are exposed to pornography, when they're exposed to some sort of sexual content. So I think that this is something that happens in the offline world, and they overlap in that sense. But I think we need to start thinking. I'm thinking all about Latin America. You know, I'm like Latino guy, so I'm always raising my Latino flag here. So how can we actually raise awareness about the online world? At the same time, we have to advance our public policies because they are very broad. So you have public policies that are very broad about child sexual abuse and child sexual exploitation. But how do people in the law system, in the child protective services, actually understand those public policies in the online world? So I think when you read Brazilian or Argentinian legislation, any act that might endanger the health and the well-being of a child, that is very broad. You know, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to actually look at something and say, this is abuse. And when you're not able to do that, it's up to the judges or it's up to the Child Protective Service or to the police to decide on that. So I think we have a two-way path, you know, offline child sexual abuse. I think the awareness is the last research latest data we have is like 95% of the population knows what to do with offline child sexual abuse. But the problem is they don't know exactly what is online child sexual abuse. So we have this overlap of awareness and overlap of when should I disclose and when should I report.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, definitely. I think you raise a lot of really important points there about this being somewhat like still a new and emerging area that intersects with the older area that we do have a lot of research on, and how do we bring them both together? I'm curious, Bernie, do you have anything to add to that? I'm just curious from the health standpoint and your background. Could you add any more to that?
Yes, I've always felt that you cannot really separate online and offline child sexual abuse. That what online has done is really increase access to the children, and increase access to the children from any person anywhere in the world, and that it has also increased the ways that the child can be sexually abused. Of course, so and also there are more people involved. Maybe in some forms, it's just the child being groomed by a perpetrator, but now you put in that this is done through a platform, and a platform is run by tech companies. So in that sense, they are collaborators, and even if they say they don't want to do it, but they provide the means for it to be done. So you have now more people who are actually guilty, if I may say so. If more people that can be prosecuted. But for me, the really the risk and the protective factors are almost all similar, and those who are at risk for offline abuse are the same children who are at risk for online abuse. The perpetrators who facilitate it or involved in it are also people they know, both online and offline. Except that I said there are more people involved now. You're bringing the world into your bedroom. So there are more people who are involved. And as I said, the means to do it, is propagated by other people, also by corporations. So that's how wider online abuse has made child sexual abuse.
Definitely. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that, Bernie. Do any of the other panelists want to come in, Moni or Natalie?
Yes, I can come in. I think, yeah, a few points already have been raised by Sydney and Bernie that are very relevant. Indeed, online and offline are deeply intertwined, and we know that what happened offline can now be recorded and become an online problem, and vice versa. What happened online can go offline, and that's very true that they do share protective and vulnerability and risk factor. Obviously, because of the online dimension, you have an additional dimension. For example, you have risk factors such the hours a child will spend online that will increase them encountering risk and actually facing sexual harm that are specific to the online dimension that research is still learning about, and there's a lot of lessons we can learn from the in-person abuse, but there's also a specific dimension that online spaces bring and specific vulnerability that are not necessarily present in the in-person one. Obviously, the ease of access is one of them as well. The fact that a sex offender that might not be someone would have initiated anything offline, start being addicted to porn and then to hardcore porn and then reach the level of child sexual abuse and become suddenly attracted to children, also bring this kind of level of additional factors from the perpetrator's side. That's not that was not there when we didn't have this online environment. And obviously one of the layers also at tech companies that have a role to play here. And that so far there's no really much regulation to help them do something, and it's very dependent on the platform, what they are wanting and willing to do or capable to do. And that's also makes it much more complex, is how do we deal with crimes online and children being online and having their social life online from very early age right now. And we cannot dissociate it, the online life of children with the in-person life of children anymore. But somehow we have to step up into make sure that they are less at risk than they are now, because right now um, not much is being done, and the lack of ability to understand as well what's happening and what are the right solution for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And something I can, a common theme between the three of you that have brought up this aspect of like law enforcement and policy, and how do we address that now with this online kind of space? And I think it would be a great segue now to go into the protection and the laws around that. And I'll let Kelvin kind of jump in here because that is his expertise. But I think in particular, Moini and Natalie again, maybe we could discuss some of the child protection laws. But Kelvin, would you like to go ahead and ask questions?
Yeah. Thanks, Sabrina. I'm really interested in what was very interesting was Bernie saying that the children are inviting people into their bedrooms, which is so very true. Expanding on that, in terms of the end-to-end encryption, which we're seeing more and more of on these particular platforms, I'll be interested to know what your particular jurisdictions are doing around fighting this and engaging with those platforms. What are your governments doing? Is there any action being taken in your jurisdictions? Perhaps Moini, come to you first.
Thank you. I would like to agree with what the panelists are saying, because for us, it has not been easy to even label online and offline. Why? Because when you look at the continent, there is always exploitation at a certain phase. And when you look at the use of digital technology, you'll find that, for example, like give an example of grooming, there's grooming, and then at the end of the day, you find that the perpetrator and the child are meeting online. And again, you even find the self-generated images, which is a trend that we're seeing, and an increased trend that we're seeing, especially in Kenya. You find that the self-generated images, they are being used by perpetrators to coerce the victims. And then at the end of the day, they demand a personal meeting, and then the sexual abuse comes in. To answer the question that Kelvin is asking, when you look at end-to-end encryption, this is a challenge which I think when you look at encrypted messages, not unless we get in-person reporting or a person reporting to us as child protection experts, it's not easy for us to even penetrate. So what we've done is we've agreed with the technology providers, if they can have some kind of safe agents, people that can also penetrate and put on some kind of checks. But you look at the tech industry, these are people that are in business. So again, it becomes a challenge to get a way forward with end-to-end encryption. And that is why you find that it's agreeable to come together with all the partners and all the child protection experts globally and issue kind of statements about end-to-end encryption. I think I can ask if there's someone else that wants to add on that.
We had an experience about 2 months ago in Brazil that Twitter was off for a full month because of Nazi accounts in Twitter. So for you to share or distribute Nazist content is a crime in Brazil. And Twitter was like, oh, that's not a problem. So Brazil pulled the plug on Twitter. It was international news what the Supreme Court did it, because Twitter was saying that, oh, we cannot do anything about that. Well, 2 months later, we do not have any more Nazi content on Brazilian Twitter. So I think there's a lot of work that the big techs don't want to do it because they monetized those accounts of child sexual abuse, of hate content, and I think there's a big issue because in Latin America, when you look at the data, 95% of the adolescents in Latin America, they have a cell phone with an internet connection. So that's almost every single adolescent has a cell phone with internet. And they do not see a boundary between the online and offline as myself as a millennium saw it. You know, you had an offline life, and then you would have like this small part of your life that was online, that you would game with your friends, you would chat with your friends. But now this boundary is over. It's the same life, the online and offline. For them, there's not this wall separating those two things, and especially because social media has a lack of regulation, and not, I would say, Kelvin, not just about the encryption in Latin America, about access, about creating accounts under the name of other people. So there, and now there was a major case in Brazil about an account. They used AI to actually change faces in sexual content using children. So there's like this lack of any regulations, and the big techs and they monetize with that, and they really don't want to actually put children first. They are always thinking about their own money, and this is something that the governments and the civil society will have to aim for it, because I don't think they're going to regulate themselves at any point. I don't see that happening anywhere in the world.
Thanks, Sydney. I agree. That's great to see that the Brazilians are standing up to Twitter. I love that. Interesting to hear, Bernie. When you talk about inviting people into the bedrooms, I think what we're seeing is that end-to-end encryption is not only inviting bad guys into the bedrooms, but it's drawing the curtains and turning the light off at the same time. So with the live streaming issues that are ongoing within the Philippines, are you seeing that being impactful?
You know, every time I read a research article or a news somewhere, the Philippines is always cited as the epicenter of live sex trade. I mean, we get that reputation now. and that's why I wonder about findings saying that most of the victims are white female. How can that be if the Philippines is the epicenter? And but our new law, you know, and you can download our Republic Act 11930. You can download that from the internet. It's really, really comprehensive. And one of the reasons for that law is the live streaming of child sexual abuse in the Philippines. So it defines live streaming. It defines, you know, it tries as much as it could to give more power to law enforcement in terms of investigating and trying to involve ISPs, internet service providers. But it's a new law, so we don't know yet how effective would be the implementation. But we have that tool. We have that tool to use. So I don't know. You know, in terms of encryption, I don't know how we can really battle that, because it's really should be the platform taking responsibility once it's discovered that their platform is used, there must be some sort of responsibility to penalize, because if they could get away with it, if there's then they're not gonna do anything to change it, so we'll see. But it needs really prosecutors to be very, very aggressive in my country. And I think we're seeing that. But in our study reviewing the Supreme Court decisions, it's just starting. This prosecution of Oxea, it's just really starting. So and there's no tech company yet that has been in any way sued or being held responsible. But the day will come.
Let's hope so, Bernie. Let's hope so, Bernie. So expanding that and directing the question to yourself, Natalie, how do child protection laws address both online and offline forms of abuse, and what gaps still exist in your particular context or globally?
So I'm based in Brussels and work on the European Union law and policies. And yeah, the end-to-end encryption is a thorny issue right now here. And obviously one of the issue is how to address detecting abuse there while ensuring privacy of user, because obviously end-to-end encrypted channel, there's a higher expectation of privacy. But we all know that now the majority of the child sexual abuse does occur on those channels, and maybe the children and the offenders meet in gaming, but then they're off-platforming to another end-to-end encrypted channel. And there are technologies that do exist with advantages and disadvantages, such as client-side scanning, when you can scan on the device of the child, for example, and check if the child is not receiving or sending imagery that would qualify as child sexual abuse. But obviously, so far it's up to companies to decide whether they want to do that, and they not have any incentive, because if they start scanning, it means that they're going to have to look at the imagery, to pay a moderator to look at them, check if it's actual child sexual abuse, and send to law enforcement, which is why Facebook Messenger has decided to encrypt the channels, because it was such an amount of imagery that they were finding on Messenger, and it was costly thing to double check, and then they decided to end-to-end encrypt to make the problem go away for them, so to speak. So it's really has been a thorny issue and a reason why it's difficult to move ahead with policies. But what I really find difficult with at least European policymakers, and I think it's not just policymakers, it's a general lack of understanding of the seriousness of online crime. There's this idea that because it's happened online, that the child might not have been touched by the sex offender if it's fully 100% online. It's not that serious. So I had discussion with people saying, yeah, but it can't be as serious as, if the child is being penetrated by the offender. But actually, first of all, we can't define trauma like this. Events that happen fully online, if the child is being, groomed and enticed to do something to themselves, to share imagery, in the repetition of the case can be as serious in terms of trauma. We can see also from research, compared to offline or in-person victims of online child sexual abuse have a higher level of self-blame, for example, because they feel that if they are offline, they have no choice to endure the physical threat of the offender, but offline, they've been tricked to do something, and they could have shut down the computer, so to speak. But obviously, that's not how abuse works. And you have this victim also that have their imagery that keeps on circulating. So the trauma, the dignity is forever there, and our dignity is forever violated. because they keep on circulating and they can't move on from the experience as well. And I think there's a deep lack of understanding that online crime is serious, and we see it in penalties being lower for when it happens on the online than offline. And we don't think that's adequate and reflective of the seriousness of the crimes that actually happen online. And I think that's a big work we are doing here in the European Union, is try to educate people, better understanding the dynamics and the seriousness of these crimes that happen online. And obviously, the only way we can move forward is indeed to have some kind of standards that force tech company to do something, and to, you know, technology can develop at a fast speed, and we already behind. And now we have AI coming up with even more challenges, because, yeah, as explained, that they can change the face, they can make up anything they want. So it's really, we are already too late, and it's really, you know, time to try to do the right thing and to have a common, ultimately, it should not just be done at European level or in Brazil or in the Philippines. It should be a global solution, because internet is borderless, and we need global solution to address these issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, were you going to say something, Kelvin?
No, I was just going to agree with you absolutely. And how we get global legislation in place is the biggest question that I have. And if any of the panelists have got an answer to that, I'd be really interested to know.
I see Bernie has her hand up. Bernie, do you want to go?
Yeah, I was wondering, you know, if we cannot force companies to do certain things, how about, you know, with AI, programs can be made that can be installed in phones and in computers of children, that can recognize patterns, you know, that can recognize patterns and say, oh, this is a dangerous pattern, you know, this child is being groomed, this child is being made to send nude pictures. I mean, you know, AI can be programmed to do so many things. So why not do that? I don't think that will be difficult to program.
In total agreement, Bernie. I think there are many ways, and I think it's totally possible to eradicate what we're talking about here. But there isn't that desire from big tech, because that doesn't make the money. Yeah, I mean, Childlight are actually hosting a round table with a view to eradicating CSEA from the internet, to stop it actually getting on there in the first place, which, you know, would be the absolute perfect solution. So we're looking at ways of doing that, and inviting experts from across the globe to come and talk about that in January. So we'll feed back to this group in terms of how that potentially could happen. Is there any of the other panelists, any thoughts on this? Moni?
I think what Bunny is raising is really critical. I would like to say that we've got some tech industries like Meta. They've got, in fact, they're using AI tools to be able to assess the age, to be able to block even some of the indecent materials that can get across to the children. So if each and every tech industry is able to use these AI tools, I think we'll be moving in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to come in as well. This is less of a question and more of just really agreeing with you, Natalie. You brought up that really important point of how in policy and governments and tech, they don't quite understand the mental health impact of offline or online offences, I should say, because they don't view it as severe, which is something, like I said earlier in the session, I mean, I'm very biased because that's what my whole research is about for my PhD, but I just think it's something that is really interesting in terms of we have social media companies focusing on anti-bullying campaigns because we know that affects children's mental health, and that's all online. But yet we can't, for some reason, these companies can't wrap their head around focusing now on more, on these, cases of offline CSCA. Maybe it's because they claim they don't have the right tools how to talk about it or how to discuss it, but it just seems like a bit of a cop-out. So yeah, I just wanted to say. And also just kind of going back, because I know we mentioned at the beginning as well that we can learn a lot from, oh, Natalie, please jump in, go ahead.
You could finish if you want.
No, please, because I was going to
Okay.
start another question, so go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I just because I wanted to follow up on what you mentioned, and that's true that we need more awareness about child sexual abuse online. And I think especially now that adolescents also have experience of sexual relationship online, so they are sexting, and this way, you know, that can be a healthy, but also that could be unhealthy dynamics as well. Pressure to send nudes or being received nude when you don't want to. And I think maybe merging a bit with the offline child sexual abuse, there's a need to integrate in the prevention of child sexual abuse generally, the online dimension and what it means to consent or not consent online. And it's very important what it means to have sexting that's okay, but sexting that goes into dynamics that are healthy and actually potentially harmful. And this needs to be brought into the more general prevention of child sexual abuse, whether in person or online.
Absolutely, I agree. And I was just going to say right before, and anyone feel free to jump in on this question specifically, but we had mentioned earlier on that we can learn quite a lot from the research that we've done for offline CSCA. And while there is some of those difficulties and intricacies with tech in the online space, is there anything that we can learn from offline child protection mechanisms and vice versa as well? Has anyone used these two to kind of help the other?
This is not yet an answer to your question, Sabrina, but a thought just came into my head. Has anybody ever made a research where, for example, Muslim countries where you're supposed to wear a burqa, you cannot show any part of your body, whether sexting in those countries are less?
Interesting.
I can certainly say that it's probably less, but it still happens. I've conducted investigations in a lot of the Middle Eastern countries where the offending still takes place. So I would suggest that it's probably reduced, but it doesn't eradicate it. Certainly, I've worked in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and a lot of the other Middle Eastern countries where victims still exist, and the offenders still manage to coerce the victims to remove the burqas and anything else that they're wearing. So, yeah, I think it probably is reduced, but it still definitively happens. The bad guys seem to have a way of getting into the rooms and the bedrooms of people, even in countries where legislation and cultural laws exist to protect them. Sydney, I'm interested in terms of the how online can learn from what offline have been doing for many years. Anything that you've got in the South American context?
Yeah, we've been trying to find the similarities and difference between those two worlds. So one of the works that we are doing right now is one of my students' work, Arthur, and he's looking at every single comment in those viral dances that children do today. He's looking at the comments of those videos. And it's like we need to take care of his mental health because it's very, very disturbing, the comments that people make on children's videos dancing. So if a person does that in the real world, he will probably not get away in Brazil of doing that kind of comment to a child in the real world. So I think there's the possibility of being anonymous on the internet is one of the main difference of the type of comments that people do to children in the online setting. We see a lot of similarities in the way that children are groomed in Latin America. There was this famous case in Brazil of a young boy that he would try to groom the aggressors, and then he would invite them to the police station, and he would show up as Spider-Man so he could arrest the aggressors. It was like on every single news channel in Brazil. So it seems that the grooming process in Latin America is very similar, you know. And here in Latin America, we have a huge inequality. So there's we have a need to understand what kind of grooming process goes through with children that are under social vulnerabilities. So because when you're thinking about Europe and Canada and developed countries, and actually right now it's high income countries that the World Bank calls it, uh, the percentage of poverty in those countries is very low compared to Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa. So we're actually facing two different types of crises. So you have the social vulnerability that adds risk to sexual exploitation and child sexual abuse, and you actually do not have control what is happening online. So we're still trying to bridge that gap. What is similar and what is different from the real world, from the in-person world to the online world. And one of the things that we found in our qualitative data is that parents have no idea on how to actually monitor children. That in all of the different income ranges in Brazil. So how do you monitor your children? They know how to monitor in person. So if they go to a playground, I'm going to be around. I'm going to let them, because this is very important for Brazilians, let them play. But I'm going to be supervising. I'm going to monitor. I'm going to check the background of the school, of the professors, but they don't have a clue on how to do that online. So there's a lot of learning that still needs to be done by us and by parents uh, to how actually monitor those children to avoid child sexual abuse online. But I believe that one of the main similarities are on the risk of exposure when you're not monitored. So how we can improve monitoring online and offline. So that is a key point in Brazil. Uh, Professor Elizabeth Letourneau from Johns Hopkins University, she made she published a lot of research about child sexual abuse in organizations, YMCA, Scout Boys, and this is something that in Brazil and in Latin America in general, we are still trying to figure out how did that happen. You know, you see a lot of that research in the Ireland, in the UK, but you still do not have that in low and middle income countries. So I think there's this ton of knowledge that we have from high income countries that they might not translate to our reality. So I feel many times, Calvin, that when we get what the research in the UK tells us, a lot of policymakers they want to copy and paste that, and that just doesn't work in our reality because of cultural differences, because of how we see parenting. I have two students from Leicester here at this week at my lab. We've been working together for some time, and they were talking to me how affectionate Brazilian parents seem for them because we hug and kiss a lot all the time. That's a very Latino thing to do. And they were like, oh, British people are affectionate, but in a different way than Brazilians, you know? You're kissing your child all the time in the head, in the hands. That's something you do. And they were like, that's not very common. Public displays of affection in Brazil are very common even between friends, you know, you touch each other a lot. So if I copy and paste a scale or any type of measure from the UK, I'm probably going to have a lot of false positives. And a lot of people are not going to, oh, that's not violence. You know, that's just the way this society works. So we have a lot of trouble of actually doing research, getting quality data, because a lot of the times people are just copy and paste what they found in the UK, in France, in the Netherlands. So that's a big issue for us, you know. We still do not have what the US, Canada, the UK have. Oh, those are the main risk factors for our context. We still do not have that. So it's hard for me to answer that question. So we're like step by step. We're doing what you guys did in the 90s.
That's really interesting. Yeah, Sydney. That's and very, very true in terms of the different cultural levels and how people perceive. And there is not one size fits all for sure. Yeah, Bernie.
Yeah, we've done the systematic review in the Philippines of what are the risk factors for child sexual abuse offline. This was like in 2016, using the ecological framework, the risk factors from individual, family, peers, community, school, culture and society, etc. And looking at those risk factors now, they're the same risk factors for offline and online child sexual abuse. I don't think it has changed, except, of course, we added increased usage of the internet, as a risk factors. I mean, there are additional risk factors, but the offline risk factors, as we know it, still holds. Now, Together for Girls has come up with this updated life system review on what works in the prevention of child sexual abuse. And it's easy to obtain it online. It's very new. It was just launched before the Bogota conference. And now I'm wondering whether using the Inspire framework from laws, norms, parenting, safe environment, and so forth. So now I'm wondering whether some of those prevention programs, new research can be made looking at whether using those prevention programs that work for offline, whether it would work for online. I think that would be a very good study to do, because what we're planning to do with Oxford, with the Parenting for Lifelong Health Trust in Oxford, we're planning to do the research on parenting to prevent online child sexual abuse, um, because they have preliminary data using that parenting program in Tanzania, and they said there's some evidence that it's going to work in preventing online child sexual abuse. So we would like to do that research in the Philippines.
That would be extremely fascinating, really. Do keep us updated if that gets started anytime soon. I see, Moni, you've got your hand up as well.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So I would like to say that we should agree that responding to both offline and online should be able to address blurred boundary between the two. And we've seen that it is crucial for us to respond to both offline and online jointly. And what we've been able to learn from these offline and online cases is that it's possible to even use data, especially geotagging and videos online, and help us solve offline cases. This is a lesson that we've been able to learn here in Kenya. And then when you look at even the strategies that we use for offline prevention or offline response, you find that the same is usually also used, like creation of awareness and education is also used in offline cases. And then again, another thing is issues of collaborations. you look at handling offline and online cases require collaborations, require partnerships. And with this, it has been possible for us to address these matters collectively.
Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. Natalie, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe to respond to your original question, that's true that we do fill the gaps in terms of research with research that's been on in-person child sexual abuse. But we do notice that there are some specific risk factors for the online dimension that are not necessarily present for the in-person abuse. Taking, for example, the social economic factors, which true, it's still there for the online, but we do notice that, for example, middle class or kids from wealthier backgrounds are targeted for sexual extortion because they have some means to provide to offenders. Like we see, for example, boys from wealthier background are being specifically targeted for a sexual extortion. And also we can see there's been some cases of young girls, for example, selling sexualized pictures of themselves to keep up with a lifestyle, like an influencer lifestyle of, accessing some goods that they would not have otherwise. And we can see that these things does start to happen as well online. One of the factor could be also isolation as well, as obviously lack of involvement of parents. And I think that's great to look into how parents can better support children and better understand how to monitor them. But I'm always wary of saying, oh, we have the solution. Parents need to step up. We just need to educate them. Parents are already, trying to do everything. They're trying to be good parents, to have money every month to pay for everything. And they can't monitor everything that kids are doing online, especially the kids spending so many hours online for many different reasons. Sometimes it's educational as well. And we want to empower parents for sure, but not bring it as a burden for them either. And it shouldn't be something that would cover a lack of investment into having tech solution, for example, policy solutions, having education in schools as well for children to better self-regulate and empower children themselves to better identify the risks and better understand those risks and better responding those risks online. So I think that's always my concern when we mention parents. I think that's definitely an important aspect, but it has really to be thought through as one of the many tools that needs to be happening to tackle these issues overall. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like what you said there, Natalie. I mean, parents already have quite a lot on their plate, and to place that whole responsibility on them isn't sustainable, right? We need to bring together everyone in this space who can, tech companies, policy. Sydney, I see that you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, adding something to what Natalie just said, we were doing the adaptation of the iCast with Professor Francisca Mike from Edinburgh here in Brazil. And there's this cognitive interview part of the adaptation. And it was very interesting because the sexual abuse has a lot of online sexual abuse items for the students to discuss. And many items, the adolescents were like, oh, but this is what happens to everyone. Someone showing you unsolicited sexual pictures in theirs or your cell phone. Brazilian students were like, oh, but this is like the norm, right? This happens to everyone. And they would not grasp the concept of violence that was associated with that. And many times for those students regarding child sexual abuse in person, it was very clear for them what is actual abuse. So trying to go back to Kelvin's original question and to what Natalie said, I think in Latin America, we had a lot of awareness, especially from the healthcare area, a lot of awareness campaigns about stranger danger, all about that stuff that has been happening in the Europe and North America for a long time. So children know when something's off in the real world. But in the online world is very unclear for them and for parents and for schoolers and for everyone actually many times. And it was very interesting because many times the students did this three parts of integrating sexual abuse. They were talking about their own experiences. Oh, this never happened to me. And they would say, but I know someone who went through something like that. And at the same time, they would think about the consequences. Well, I think that was violence because that person felt bad. He would drop out that year at school. So he would make the connections of the consequences. But to look at a behavior and say, oh, this is violence, for them was still very hard to grasp that concept. So I think we might see similar behaviors and contexts, Calvin, for the online and real world. But mainly, I think in Latin America, what we are seeing right now is that everyone's trying to grasp at something. What do we know so far about child sexual abuse in our context? And how do we actually try to understand this world? Because I'm 38, I don't get it. Instagram, I just don't get it. Brazilian adolescents love that thing, you know. So we have these generational gaps to ourselves as well, I don't get it. TikTok, I really don't get it. It's not my thing, but it's the most popular app with adolescents. So we as schoolers might as well have to do this kind of work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see that, Natalie, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on this. We did research together with Eurochild and ECPAT International called Voice, where we talk with children, and we had a survey with parents across 15 countries. There were 10 countries in Europe, 3 in Asia, and 2 in Latin America, actually. And we talked with the children about their experience of risk online, and really what worried us is it seemed for them to have a normalization of harms. So they expect to be bothered by inappropriate messages. They expect to potentially receive inadequate pictures. They expect sexual harms. And actually, that should worry us, that for them, it's part of the online environment. They just think, oh, we're just going to block and report and move on. But then there's a level of normalization of behavior that should not be normalized in the first place. And it's definitely something that we felt when talking with children. They know what we're talking about, and they have heard, experienced it, or friends experience it. But yeah, ultimately, they should not have to experience these things in the first place. And comparing to the offline world, we would never allow this kind of messaging and contact in person. So why are we allowing it online? That's also something that is very telling.
Absolutely. And I've popped the Voice project into the chat for anyone interested. It's a brilliant report. I really highly recommend people take a look at that. So thank you, Natalie, for bringing that up. It's a great resource and makes a lot of really great points. Bernie, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I just want to make the point that I actually also call online child sexual abuse as the commercialization of incest. So actually, incest is very common. And now they find a way to make money out of it. So I personally don't think that anyone has figured out how to prevent incest. And then if you add in the online part where now they make money out of it, that's even encouraging. And when we talk about exploitation, there are many ways now that the children are exploited by their parents, aside from the full-on sex part. they're also, they have websites where they're dressed skimpily, and you subscribe to this website where you have children doing, maybe doing normal things, but they're being followed by these pedophiles in their normal lives, and that's now being sexualized. So again, the involvement of parents themselves on exploiting their children, for me, is further encouraged um, by the online environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead, Calvin.
Yeah, I was just going to we're talking about the comparison between online and offline offending. And one of the big things that I've seen with online offending is the speed of escalation is often a lot faster. I'm just interested to know, Natalie, TDH have used some really inventive ways of checking this. I'm thinking of Sweetie and similar. Have you noticed anything that you could comment on in terms of those studies?
So we have closed the 3D program for quite a few years, actually. So yeah, I think obviously we do research quite a lot on talking with children and parents, and what we are currently looking at is certain type of vulnerable groups, such as children with disabilities, children from LGBT groups, and also children from indigenous status, and to understand better how these vulnerable factors comes out in terms of risk online, and what's the difference with online and offline, obviously. And yeah, we're trying to better understand overall how we can address and support children and parents, and have better solutions. But I think we mentioned it already, there's no one magic solution for these topics. And outside of better understanding, we need a toolbox that will address not only the tech side, but also education side, whether it's sexual and reproductive health, how it's what it means for the online dimension, whether it's the parents need to be better monitoring online, whether it's what's harmful, what's not, how to report, how to do better overall with these things. So that's what we've been focused on a lot on. And obviously, technology is a tool that can be used for good purpose and bad purpose. And here, there's opportunities to use it for good purpose as well. Obviously, there's implication of trying to use technology that we have to be mindful, especially here in Brussels. A lot of talk about the privacy implication of trying to detect abuse, and we have to take those seriously and see how we can move on in ways that balance all the rights. But in the same time, we do feel strongly that the experience of children online is not yet researched enough and known enough by everyone. And I think everyone has a piece of the puzzle to be made here to try to better understand and address these things.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just cautious of the time as well. I know between Kelvin and I, we could probably let this go on for hours. I have so many questions, but I think it's fair we can open up the floor now. Does anyone who's joining us online have any questions for the panelists? If you do, feel free to pop them in the chat or raise your hand and unmute yourself. Like I said, if not, we've got plenty. Don't let us keep asking them. Here we go. Zoe, yes, go ahead.
Hi, good, morning-ish, everybody. Thank you so much for such an interesting panel. I'm Zoe Goldbach. I'm working at ICMEC. And so, Sydney, you mentioned, this move from the Brazilian government to block Twitter, X, whatever, to the country. And that made me think of, the recent move of the Australian government to talk about blocking social media for children. I wonder if you have thoughts on this. What do you think from, I guess, your government's perspective? Do you think it's doable in your country? And I guess in general, do you think that's a good move? Thank you.
Great
Well,
question.
one of the things Brazilians are very well known for their humor. So people were joking, oh, this country is not the US. Here we have laws, It's like we were very, uh, people were making fun of that decision in the sense that we have national laws about social media that need to be followed. And the idea is that those are online spaces, there are crime spaces right now for drug selling, human trafficking, all of you name the crime, you're going to find online. And X actually tried to say that they didn't had to do anything about that. So I think was a risky move because, but Brazilians move on with their lives, nobody had any bad feelings towards that. I think the Australian movement is very hard for you to actually enforce it. I don't know how they're going to enforce the social media ban on children and adolescents. And I don't think that those types of bans would work with VPN. And people have a lot of way of trespassing, those kind of things. So I think in Brazil it was one type of block because it was about Twitter actually being responsible for what displays in its own social media. So and at the time the main investor of Twitter, oh, I'm not going to follow. Well, then he started losing more money with Twitter, and then he changed his mind. But I think the ban in Australia is harder for you to enforce it, and I think that in a sense would lead to it's very hard for you to control this type of change. People have social media lives. Some adolescents, they talk more to their friends on their cell phones than they actually do it in person. So how are you going to control that? So what you're going to call a social media. So I've been working in Mozambique for 3 years now, and WhatsApp is their main social media. So everyone from my team, every professional that I have on my WhatsApp from Mozambique, there's WhatsApp status is their social media. So every day they have like thousands of pictures of my team in Mozambique. So it's WhatsApp and a social media. So for that group, it is. So how do you define that? And I think that you can do the same about Telegram or any other form of mass communication that we have today. I believe that uh, we're still lacking some apps that can actually remove content and that can restrain contact of adults to children. I think that would be a smaller or more I won't say easy because I don't know how to do that. So it's very it's very comforting to say, oh, that's easy to do, but I think that would be easier than actually banning social media. I don't I think that's going to backfire at some point, you know. Uh, but I don't know. We have to wait and see how they're going to enforce that, or if it's going to be in Latin America, we call it a law, so everyone is happy. So, oh, we created this law, we don't do anything, we don't enforce the law, but the government says, well, we did our best. I think the social media ban might be one of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, go ahead, Bernie. You want to come in on that? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Bernie.
Yes, I'm sure everybody in the world is thinking that it is very hard to implement, but maybe it's one way of changing norms. You know, it might be instrumental there. Because if you read the book of Jonathan Hyde, The Anxious Generation, he's one of those who's really proposing that you delay exposure of children to social media as long as you could, and 16 is probably one of those ages that he was like targeting if you could delay it up to that age. But it's the peer pressure that's making it difficult. But if you start changing the norms of what people will believe in, and what the children themselves later on will be encouraged to believe in, maybe that is what will help in the implementation.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is such an interesting conversation because I think that there's two things there, right? It's either outright banning it or delaying when children can start accessing this social media. And I think it's interesting because while we talk about all the negative sides of social media, there is that aspect of, are we going to further isolate children who are then going to look for other forms of connection? And you always have a what if, it's not so black and white. And that's one of the arguments what we were saying, Bernie, about, changing those social norms, changing the age in which children are joining. It's like age verification processes, where does that come into play? Where do these other mechanisms come into play before we outright ban it for the general population or for just children and adolescents? How do you decide that? And yeah, very interesting. Thank you so much, Zoe, for your question. Great discussion. We have one more question in the chat, and depending on the time after, this might be our last one, but if anyone else has any questions, do feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But we have a question that's asking, how can researchers and practitioners in low and middle income countries integrate data on online and offline exploitation to provide a context-specific understanding of the issue? Because a lot of the times there's limited evidence on nuances in LMIC country context. And how can we ensure we get adequate funding and context-specific evidence to inform regulations rather than generalizing findings from other countries? And I think this question can be really open to anyone. I know, Sydney, you've touched on it a bit, but feel free for any of the panelists to comment on this specifically.
I have a lot of answers to this specific question. So my first one will be that a lot of the systematic reviews and meta-analyses that are done in our area do not add low and middle income countries research because they are in a different language. So most of those meta-analyses are not meta-analyses because they do not consider what we are doing here. So I had the chance to work with Professor Melendez Torres from Exeter in the UK. So we performed a global review of school-based gender-based based violence prevention programs. So he had a team of translators. So if it was in Turkish, in Korean, in Portuguese, any other language, he would have a team of translators that would translate the paper so the whole team could have access. But that is very expensive, and that is very it takes time for you to do something like that, for you to find the great literature, because many African journals are not on Web of Science, on EBSCO, or any other database. So I think, how do you actually give voice and listen to those professionals? That's one thing. The other is that there are some funding available for low and middle income countries, but many times they do not have a realistic view of what people can actually achieve and while you are working. So RCTs are very hard to do in the best of conditions. When you're working in a rural area in Brazil, that's almost impossible for you to achieve an RCT. So I think many times the funders have like this, I don't know, it's like a big dream of having an RCT, so that will be the milestone to achieve. And I think that's something that actually creates a barrier of actually trying to understand and to advance knowledge on that area as well in low and middle income countries. And I'm going to try to be very brief about the next one. I think the third main issue that I can see is that many times, and this is something that is not just me saying, every single Latino colleague and African colleague that I talk to feels the same way. Every single time that we submit a paper to journals, there's this comment, oh, you have to review your English, even when we have co-authors that are from England or the US. So that's the first comment. Oh, this was made in Brazil, so you have to review your English. And all the time I have co-authors that are from the UK or the US. So yeah, you can say that my English is not perfect, but I really doubt that GJ or Deborah Goldfarb or Gail Goodman don't English needs to be reviewed. So I think there's a lot of barriers for us in the global south regarding the knowledge that we are producing and the way that our culture works towards science. So I don't know if Bernie feels the same here or Winnie or Natalie experiences the same in the global south, but I feel those three barriers are the main ones for us.
Thank you so much for bringing those up. I'm interested to hear from the rest of the panelists if they have anything to add.
There are many right now in terms of OSEC. There are many studies now that are multi-country and involving low and middle income countries, like the disrupting harm studies, for example. Those are national studies and have been done in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And it's being expanded to other countries. So I think there is more data out there, and I think Childlife is also trying to get more and more data available for everyone, uh, coming from also different countries around the world. So I think that more and more we have these studies from low and middle income countries.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's definitely emerging, and it's important that we really highlight that work that's ongoing. I noticed that we have. Oh, go ahead, Natalie. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very important to be more inclusive in researching additional country. We find that there's a lot of research from North America, UK, and so forth, but much less even within Europe. Like as soon as you have another language, there's less accessible and less study to look at. We do always try to, when we do multi-country research, to have research from different continents. So like The Voice, we do in 3 continents. But that's true that sometimes it does add layers of some language barriers, because our partners on the ground who will do the research might not speak English either, or they might be, so we always need to budget in translation and so forth. So it does require additional time, additional resources, but it is very important because one context is not the same, and we need to better understand. If we want global solution, we need to better understand how global solution can adapt to different contexts, for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I noticed that we just have about 10 minutes left, but there's one more question in the chat that's really, really fascinating, and I would love to spend the last few minutes answering this, if that's okay. So we have someone asking, in relation to education and awareness and changing of norms, what do you think should be added to body safety education and sexuality education, given the changing landscape and increased online child sexual exploitation abuse? This can go to any panelist.
I jump in all of the other questions. Bernie, Natalie, Winnie, you asking.
Go ahead, Bernie. Oh, you might be on mute again, I think. There we go.
So right now in the Philippines, for example, what we're doing in terms of safety education, of course, aside from the ordinary safety education that everyone gives, like not giving your personal information, keeping your just having people among your contacts, that kind of thing. But they also need to know a lot about relationships. What makes for a healthy relationship. You do not have necessarily to focus whether that relationship is online and offline. But a lot of Filipino children don't know what is a normal, healthy sexual relationship, and and also they need to know about the dangers of what's happening now online. The sexting and sextortion, and they have to be aware about that, and on what they can share online that will not come back and bite them. Those are the things that we add on to the safety education.
Absolutely.
Allow me to just add on what Bani has just finished saying. When you look at Kenya, we've had education in schools, and we are having a curriculum that is going to talk about online sexual exploitation and abuse. What we've been doing, and especially on body safety, we've had organizations that have been doing campaigns, and they've been talking about the essence of safety, and especially to children when it comes to body parts, and the fact that they should understand that the body parts are not supposed to be touched, they belong to them, and those things. And even sharing of images, especially when it comes to their body parts. So this is a campaign that has been taken on by several stakeholders in the child protection space. And then we've also been having reproductive health in schools. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Wani. Do we have any other panelists that want to come in?
What we're trying to do here in Brazil is for young children, the use of educational books has been on the rise. There's like 2 or 3 papers that are testing which one is the best one for children to identify potential risk situations. And there are some states that are adopting the best books for that in training the teachers. And but for child sexual exploitation and online abuse, there's nothing actually in the federal level yet. So you have some local experiences or regional experiences, and most of them are, I feel that we as schoolers, we are not on the same pace as the adolescents. So I feel that we still need to improve our knowledge, and maybe we need to start using those platforms so we can have a better understanding why this is fun for them, why they are wasting so much time on those things, because none of those experiences actually work even in the knowledge area. So there was no gain of knowledge. That is the first thing that you're aiming when you're doing some sort of training or workshop. So we are still trying to to make a touch and feel basis with those interventions and what we're going to do as next steps. One thing that Professor Sheila Murta from Brasilia is coordinating is to investigate and to give children and adolescents a voice so they can actually explain what are their main concerns and previous experience, so we can try to have like a basic training in the federal level. But that is still an ongoing project, and it has UK funding. It's funded, it's from a colleague, a Brazilian that works in Oxford, Gabriela Pavarini, and Professor Sheila Murta. So we are still starting to see what will work and what won't work. Our main concern is that the government at some point is going to feel pressure to do something and is just going to create something that is not tested, or, hey, we have this brochure and that's it. But the scholars are trying to find what actually would be interesting for Brazilians in that sense.
Interesting. Well, I am aware that we only have a couple minutes left, so I just want to spend this time to say thank you so much to each of our panelists. Like I said, I feel so grateful that each of you have donated your time to be here today to talk about this very important topic, as well as our partners, the Sexual Violence Research Initiative and Childlight. I've had a wonderful co-chair with me, Kelvin. Thank you so much for providing all your input and your expertise as well, and contributing to this conversation. And I will leave this here. This has been recorded, so I'll be sending out the recording to those who have attended and those who were not able to attend but on the registered list. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar, if you're interested in joining our network, we have monthly events which include workshops and research presentations to bring together early and mid-career researchers in this field. The topic changes every month. And if you're interested, you can click on the chat, the link in the chat, which will be there in just a second. So thank you all so much. And thank you again to Natalie, Sydney, Mweni, and Bernie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.